The day started like any other Tuesday. Quiet, maybe a little too quiet if you know what I mean. I was 67, retired and happily sipping coffee on my porch, enjoying the sound of absolutely nothing, when the mail carrier dropped a large, stiff envelope through the slot. It wasn't one of those flimsy junk mail envelopes. This thing felt dense, important, and immediately my stomach did that little flip-flop thing it does when you know trouble has arrived. I picked it up. The return address was from Caldwell Property Management, a name that made my peaceful morning evaporate instantly. It was addressed to me, Liz Harrison, and when I ripped it open, or rather used my trusty letter opener to slice it neatly because I never just rip anything, I found the bill. And oh, what a bill it was. The paper felt heavy in my hand, covered in professional jargon and line items detailing things like structural foundation refit, sump pump replacement, and mold remediation. The final bolded number at the bottom of the page practically screamed at me, $12,580.42. Below that, in smaller but equally sharp print, it said, payable in full within 30 days. This bill was for the old property. Not my home, but the ramshackle, slightly sinking duplex that my side of the family, the Harrison clan, still technically owned together. It had been rented out for years, a passive, meager income source for my siblings and their kids, who were the majority owners now. I hadn't lived there in decades, barely even visited. Why was my name on a bill for $12,000 in major structural repairs? I immediately called my nephew Kyle. Kyle is, bless his heart, the self-appointed family financial manager. Which usually means he's the one who sends out the annual Christmas card and apparently massive debt notices. Kyle, it's Liz. What is this enormous bill I just got? I didn't waste time on pleasantries. My heart was starting to pound a rhythm against my ribs. He actually chuckles. A smug, irritating sound. Oh, Aunt Liz. Yeah, that's the assessment for the duplex. Those old pipes finally gave out. Major repair work. It's expensive but necessary. I understand it's necessary, but why is the entire amount addressed to me? I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Well, technically it's your portion, he said, sounding like a high schooler explaining a homework assignment he didn't do. The way the ownership is structured, and since you're the oldest remaining person on the original deed, we just figured it's simplest if you handle the payment. We'll pay you back, of course, over time once we figure out how to recoup the losses. Simplest? How I am on a fixed income. You expect me to drop $12,000 on a moment's notice for a property I haven't set foot in since your bar mitzvah? I could hear the sarcasm dripping from every word. Aunt Liz, please. It's the right thing to do. You always say you're the one who keeps everything organized, right? The responsible one. Plus, remember that apartment you stayed in for a few years back in the day? It's kind of your turn to chip in for the general upkeep. He paused and then added the line that really set me off. Don't worry, we know you have everything saved. You always do. Just pull out that secret stash you've been hoarding and write the check. Hoarding. That was the word that cut deep. It wasn't the first time I'd heard it. For decades, my family, especially the younger tech-savvy generation like Kyle, had ridiculed me for my meticulous organizational habits. They called my filing system a museum of useless paperwork. They laughed about my junk drawer that actually contained important documents, not old menus and rubber bands. My sister, Carol, used to joke that I could probably produce the receipt for her first bicycle from 1978. I keep records, Kyle. It's not hoarding, I corrected him, teeth grinding. And I don't have a $12,000 stash, just lying around for family emergencies caused by neglect. Whatever you call it, Liz, he sighed, clearly getting impatient. Just make the payment. We're getting slammed with fees every day it's late. Look, I gotta go, I have a Zoom call. Just pay the bill and we'll figure out the repayment structure later. Thanks, Auntie. Talk soon. And then he hung up. Just like that. I sat there, the crumpled $12,580.42 bill in one hand, the cold coffee in the other. My initial shock was rapidly turning into a slow, simmering rage. They weren't asking me to front the money. They were demanding it, guilt-tripping me, and doing it with that condescending tone that made me feel like an outdated relic whose only value was her ability to write a massive check. You think this is simple? I muttered to the empty room. You think I'm just going to roll over because I'm the old lady who keeps receipts? The nerve. It wasn't just the money. It was the utter disrespect. It was the underlying message. We need you for your money, but we despise your methods. I knew what I had to do. They were relying on me being scared, or worse, just being too tired to fight back. They were relying on the fact that the property in question was an old rental, the kind of place where paperwork was usually lost to the sands of time and neglect. But here's the thing about me, Liz Harrison. I don't forget things. And I certainly don't lose important documents. I stood up, pushing the screen door open with a determined shove. I wasn't going to spend $12,580.42 on a property I barely used just because it was simplest for Kyle. This was a direct challenge to my intelligence, my organizational skills, and my financial security. As I marched past the front hallway, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked like a schoolmarm who just found out someone cheated on their history test. Serious, a little flushed, but absolutely determined. I went straight to my home office. It wasn't fancy. It was just a spare room dominated by three things: a desk, a sturdy computer, and a beautiful, intimidating 5-drawer filing cabinet that I had nicknamed the Vault. That filing cabinet held the history of my life, organized alphabetically, chronologically, and sometimes emotionally. Utility bills from 1998? Every tax return since the Carter administration? Absolutely. And yes, a precise, dated, and notarized folder for every single lease agreement I had ever signed or been privy to regarding the family property. As I opened the first drawer, the metallic squeak sounding like a battle horn, I thought, they think I keep junk. Let's see whose junk drawer saves their skin now. I was looking for the file labeled Duplex. My residency, 1998 to 2001. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack of 17 years of paperwork, but I knew deep down it had to be there. I had a specific memory of putting it away. Before I start my forensic investigation, I want you guys to do something. If you have ever been mocked for being too organized, or if you keep a specific junk drawer that is actually full of treasure, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching this video from. Back to the fight. I pulled out the D folder section. The adrenaline was pumping now. I knew the stakes. If I couldn't find the proof, I was going to be forced to liquidate some of my savings, maybe even dip into my retirement funds, just to satisfy the convenience of my ungrateful relatives. I was getting warmer. The files were dated precisely in reverse chronological order. Tax documents, insurance policies, copies of my old utility bills proving my residence dates, and then right at the back, smelling faintly of old paper and victory, a manila folder marked simply and elegantly, Initial Lease Agreement and Maintenance Addendum, signed 1999. I slid it out. My hands were almost shaking. I opened it carefully, unfolding the crisp, yellowed paper. It was a standard lease, but affixed to it was a detailed 2-page addendum. My eyes scanned the text until they landed on the paragraph regarding maintenance responsibilities. I leaned back in my chair, adjusting my reading glasses, and read the key sentences. The air left my lungs in a slow, satisfying hiss. I didn't just have the original lease. I had the specific addendum I had negotiated before I moved in, back when the place was already a little run down. This wasn't just about proving I had paid my rent. This was about proving who legally was responsible for the very repairs Kyle was now trying to bill me for. I picked up the phone. I wasn't calling Kyle back yet. I needed to assemble my full arsenal first. I needed to prepare for the inevitable, ridiculous, face-dropping confrontation that was coming. The $12,580.42 bill lay flat on my desk, taunting me. I set my newly found piece of history right next to it. The battle lines were drawn. And I had a feeling the history book I'd just unearthed was about to make a very, very expensive difference. Section 2. To understand the sheer satisfaction I felt holding that old document, you have to understand the history of the Harrison family and, specifically, their long-standing habit of underestimating me. It's not just about Kyle and the bill. It's about a lifetime of being viewed as the eccentric aunt who held on to everything. My name is Elizabeth, but everyone calls me Liz. I grew up in a family that was, let's say, financially free-spirited. My father was a big dreamer but terrible at paperwork. My mother was loving, but if a document needed to be filed, it generally ended up in the nearest wicker basket, destined for the trash on Sunday. Consequently, we lost a lot of small amounts of money over the years. Missed deductions, expired warranties, forgotten security deposits. It drove me crazy even as a kid. I remember when I was 10, I started keeping a ledger of all the chores I did, just in case my dad forgot my allowance. He laughed, but I always got paid. This habit wasn't a quirk. It was a survival mechanism born from chaos. I introduced this level of extreme organization into my own life. I became a librarian, naturally working with Dewey Decimal and databases all day. My home, unlike my parents', was a fortress against disorder. Every bill, receipt, contract, and letter of importance found its way into the vault. My beautiful beige 5-drawer filing cabinet. My relatives found this hilarious. Take my sister Carol, Kyle's mother. She's the kind of person who uses her tax documents to light the barbecue. Every Thanksgiving the joke always turned to me. Liz, did you bring the original blueprints for the house? My brother David would tease, elbowing his wife. I bet she still has the adoption papers for that goldfish we had in '85. Carol would chime in, making everyone laugh, including Kyle, who was just a kid then. And I would just smile tightly. It's called due diligence, I'd reply. They called it hoarding. They saw the stacks of labeled files and the index cards and the color-coded tabs, and they saw useless junk, a sign of some sort of mild compulsion. They couldn't grasp that this wasn't about holding on to things. It was about holding on to proof. It was about having the evidence to back up your position, whether in a disagreement with a cable company or, as it turned out, with my own family. Now let's talk about the property. The duplex was inherited by my father, and when he passed away, it was split among his children. Over the years, the ownership stake had diluted among the subsequent generations, including my nephew Kyle. I had a small percentage, but my connection to it was more personal than financial for a few years in the late 90s. When I was first starting out after college, I needed a cheap place to live while I saved up for my own condo. The duplex had a vacant unit. It was run down, moldy, and needed serious love, but it was family property and they offered it to me at a deep discount. It was a favor, but one that came with an unspoken price. I was responsible for my own repairs and generally, any small maintenance issues that arose in the building. The key moment came in 1999, the year the lease agreement in my hand was signed. I realized that if I poured my savings into fixing up my apartment, things like painting, minor plumbing, and replacing broken fixtures, I could be wasting money as the family might decide to sell the whole place out from under me at any time. So, being Liz, I didn't just accept the cheap rent. I formalized the deal. I went to the family lawyer, a very patient man named Mr. Henderson, and drafted a legal addendum to my lease agreement. It stipulated two things: my discounted rent rate and, crucially, a clause about major structural maintenance. I remember the meeting distinctly. It was with my father and uncle, who were the decision-makers then. Dad, I explained, holding the contract, I'm happy to handle painting and minor plumbing. But if the entire roof collapses or the foundation starts crumbling, that's capital investment. That's on the owners, not the tenant. My dad, who honestly didn't care about documents, just wanted to get to the golf course. Fine, Liz. If the foundation fails, we'll fix it. Just sign the dang thing. They signed it without reading the fine print. They saw Liz and paperwork and immediately glazed over, thinking, oh, it's just Liz being Liz again, making sure her paperwork is perfect. They didn't take it seriously. It was just another piece of useless junk to them. But it wasn't junk. It was the agreement that protected me from exactly this situation 17 years later. I didn't stay in that apartment forever, of course. I moved out in 2001, got my condo, and secured the original signed, notarized paperwork in the vault. It was just a backup, a just-in-case file I never thought I'd need. Over the next few years, the family grew. Ownership stakes multiplied and thinned out. My original lease was long forgotten by everyone except the one person who cared enough to file it properly. Me. The duplex transitioned from family housing to a general rental property managed by the company Kyle just hired. Every single person in the family assumed that because I was the one who had physically lived there most recently, in the family anyway, I carried some lingering vague responsibility for the property. They didn't realize that in my world, vague responsibility is precisely what contracts are designed to eliminate. I looked down at the $12,580.42 bill again. The disrespect was so palpable it was almost a physical thing. They hadn't consulted me about the repairs, hadn't asked about the history of the property, and certainly hadn't checked the original lease structure. They just saw Liz, saw oldest on the deed, and saw an easy target. Someone who, in their minds, was either too gentle to fight back or too scattered by age to remember a document from the last century. They made two crucial mistakes. First, they underestimated my memory. Second, they underestimated my filing system. I felt a surge of energy that had nothing to do with caffeine. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about proving once and for all that my useless junk was the most powerful asset I possessed. This was the moment years of meticulous organization were going to pay off, not just in dollars, but in a massive, satisfying victory against familial condescension. I needed to plan my attack. Confronting Kyle over the phone wasn't enough. The entire family needed to be present for this reveal. This had to be a public, documented, and completely undeniable statement. I needed to call a family meeting. I wanted to see every single one of their faces when I showed them the records. The faces that had laughed at my files needed to drop in unison. It was time to make an appointment with the family, not for tea but for an expensive, lesson-filled presentation. The family meeting I called was set for Sunday afternoon, a time I knew most of the central parties, Carol, David, and Kyle, would be available. I made it sound urgent, which it technically was, but I kept the details vague. I simply said, "We need to discuss the Caldwell Property Management Bill and the distribution of financial responsibility." Kyle, ever the condescending voice of the modern generation, responded to the group text with, "Aunt Liz, it's already distributed. We just need you to cut the check. Why complicate this?" I typed back one simple line, "Because I'm not complicating it. I'm clarifying it. I'll bring the paperwork." That last part was, of course, met with silence, followed by an eye-roll emoji from Carol. They were all expecting me to come with a ledger detailing my recent expenses and perhaps a few emotional appeals about my fixed income. They were expecting a whine, a plea, a negotiation based on familial pity. They were certainly not expecting a legal document that would completely torpedo their plan. The setting for this drama was Carol's house, a large, overly modern space that felt sterile and uncomfortable. When I arrived, the main players were already seated around a massive granite island: Carol, David, and Kyle. They looked prepared for a long, tedious session of budgeting, armed with laptops and calculators. "Liz, thank you for coming," Carol began, laying a tone of long-suffering patience thick in the air. "Can we keep this quick? Kyle has already done the heavy lifting on the numbers." "We'll take as long as necessary, Carol," I replied, taking the one available seat and placing my briefcase on the counter. The briefcase, by the way, was ancient. A black hardshell number that looked like it contained either secret government plans or, in my case, highly sensitive legal documents. "Look, Aunt Liz," Kyle started, leaning forward with the confidence of someone who had never been truly challenged. "We get it. $12,000 is a lot. But the foundation repair was critical. We are all owners, but as the one who has held on to the longest original deed, you have the highest immediate liability and, honestly, the highest capacity to cover the lump sum without causing a bank rush." "Highest capacity? Kyle, I'm retired," I pointed out gently. "But you're also the one who is obsessively frugal." David burst out, chuckling nervously. "You have a 50-year supply of paper towels and you probably still have the first dollar you ever earned. We know you're sitting on a nest egg that far surpasses ours." Their conflict wasn't just about the money. It was a layered challenge rooted in resentment and assumption. The secondary challenge was their total belief in their own assumptions about my financial status based solely on my organizational habits. They conflated meticulous with rich and frugal with hoarder. And they felt somehow entitled to the wealth they imagined I possessed. "My frugality and organization is precisely why I have savings, David. It is also why I'm not spending them on your negligence," I stated plainly. Carol gasped dramatically. "Negligence, Liz? That's harsh. We manage the property, we hire the management company. How is that negligent?" "Negligent in reading the original property agreements," I countered, not letting their emotional defenses distract me. "Before we proceed, let's revisit the terms of my residency. I lived in that apartment from 1998 to 2001. That required signing a lease. Do you recall that lease, Kyle?" "Carol." "David." Kyle pulled up the modern management files on his laptop. "The management company provided us with a standard template from when the last tenants moved out last year. Your residency was ages ago, Aunt Liz. It's irrelevant. The current liability is based on ownership percentage." "Exactly," Carol nodded, crossing her arms. "Your paperwork obsession is cute, but not relevant to a $12,000 emergency bill." The tension in the room was rising. Their collective dismissal of the paperwork was exactly what I needed. They were digging their own hole deeper, assuring me that none of them had bothered to check the foundational documents of the property's history. They were relying entirely on the convenience of recent records and the hope that I was too sentimental or too old to fight. Irrelevant. I repeated, my voice remaining calm, which was unnerving in itself. Tell me, who exactly is responsible for all structural and capital maintenance, according to the property's foundational agreements? The current owners, of course, David said, exasperated. Which includes you, Liz. But there is an exception, I said, finally reaching for my briefcase. This was the rising tension part of the scene and I savored it. I didn't whip the document out. I slowly, deliberately, and with great precision, unsnapped the two heavy brass clasps. The sound echoed in the silent kitchen. I pulled out a single heavily folded piece of yellowed paper. It was the 1999 lease agreement and maintenance addendum. I placed it gently on the granite island, right next to Kyle's shiny laptop. This, I announced, tapping the paper, is the lease agreement I signed back in 1999. It details my rent, my responsibilities, and most importantly, the responsibilities of the owners, which at the time were Dad and Uncle Robert. This contract is still technically in effect, as it set a precedent for major capital expenditures, a responsibility that was assumed by subsequent owners, all of you. Kyle scoffed. A piece of paper from the last millennium? That's not going to hold up, Aunt Liz. That was a favor to Dad. It's signed, dated, and notarized, Kyle. And it clearly states who is responsible for major structural repairs, like, say, a foundation refit or mold remediation. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. Before I moved in, I negotiated an addendum. I agreed to handle minor upkeep in exchange for an ironclad agreement that I, as a resident, would never be responsible for capital improvements, structural issues, or major utilities replacement. And because the agreement was made to cover my entire tenancy, it was also written to govern the fundamental responsibilities of the owners concerning the property, regardless of who the tenant was later. I slid the document across the counter, pointing to the highlighted section I had prepared beforehand. Carol picked it up, her face scrunching up as she struggled to read the faded script. David looked over her shoulder. Kyle, however, looked genuinely concerned for the first time. He grabbed his phone and started frantically searching old lease agreement validity. The room was silent save for the furious tapping on Kyle's phone and Carol's labored breathing as she read the precise legal language. The owners, lessees, shall be solely and completely responsible for all capital improvements, structural integrity, utility replacement, and all repairs exceeding a cost of $1,000, indexed to inflation, without right of contribution from the lessor during or after the lessor's occupancy. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. The major repairs, the ones costing $12,580.42, were explicitly and legally the owner's financial burden, not the tenant's, and certainly not mine, the former tenant who had used a legal agreement to redefine her financial relationship with the building forever. David's jaw literally dropped. Carol just stared blankly at the paper, then back at me as if seeing me for the first time. The mockery was gone. The humor had vanished. It was replaced by shock, betrayal, and dawning financial dread. I watched Kyle furiously close his laptop. He didn't need to finish his search. He knew. My useless junk had just transformed into an impenetrable legal shield. The silence in Carol's pristine kitchen was so heavy you could cut it with a butter knife. It was the kind of silence that happens when a bomb goes off, and everyone is waiting for the ringing in their ears to stop. Kyle finally snapped his phone shut, his face pale and drawn. The arrogance had completely evaporated, replaced by a deep-seated realization of financial catastrophe. No, that can't be right, Carol stammered, still holding the paper like it was radiating bad news. Dad wouldn't have signed anything like that. It binds us. He signed it, Carol, I said calmly. It was filed properly with a notary public. See the raised seal right there? I pointed to the lower corner. And as you inherited the property interest, you also inherited the previous legal obligations tied to that property, including this specific addendum. This was the turning point. Their entire strategy, which was basically to bully the oldest, most organized relative into footing a massive bill, had just imploded. They had underestimated the power of my organizational habits, treating my paperwork like a charming eccentricity rather than a powerful, legally binding weapon. Kyle, realizing his authority as the financial manager was completely undermined, tried to pivot to an emotional appeal, which, coming from him, was a spectacle in itself. "Aunt Liz, come on," he pleaded, the smugness completely gone. "We're family. This is just a legal technicality. We're talking about a foundation that needs fixing. If we don't pay this, the property management company will put a lien on the house. We need to work together." "Work together?" I scoffed, leaning back slightly. "Where was working together when you sent me a bill for $12,580.42 demanding payment in 30 days without a single phone call or consultation? Where was working together when you joked about my hoarding and assumed I had a secret bank account ready to cover your unforeseen expenses? You were working together to make me pay." David, who had been quieter, suddenly spoke up, his voice low and accusatory. "Liz, you knew about this addendum all along. You've had this for nearly 20 years. Why didn't you mention it when we first started managing the property?" This was the betrayal and moral dilemma moment. They were trying to shift the blame onto me for not preemptively protecting them from their own laziness. "Why would I?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I negotiated that contract to protect myself when I was a struggling young woman paying rent to my family. That document was my safety net. And frankly, David, it is the responsibility of the current property owners to understand the legal history of their assets. You hired a management company. Did they do a full title and document search? Or did you just hand them the keys and say, 'Here, manage this pile of stress'?" The answer was clear in their silence. They had been sloppy. They had assumed that anything old was automatically void or forgotten. And they had paid the price for their assumption. I continued, my voice measured and firm. "I did not mislead anyone. I simply secured my position legally and filed the document correctly. You all mocked me for keeping useless junk, remember? Carol, you said I was keeping paperwork from the last century. Well, this piece of junk from the last century just saved me every penny of that $12,000 plus interest and made it entirely your problem." Carol suddenly had a moment of revelation, but not the helpful kind. "Wait a minute. You lived in that apartment for 3 years. Doesn't that mean you were responsible for the initial deterioration that led to the foundation failure?" This was a classic attempt to muddy the waters to find any loophole. "No, Carol. That's what the addendum covers," I explained, tapping the paper again. "I was responsible for minor, cosmetic repairs. The foundation issues, the sump pump failure, the mold remediation. These are structural failures caused by decades of neglect that predated my tenancy and continued after I left. The addendum specifically states that I am not financially responsible for structural integrity or capital improvements. I didn't cause this. I merely had the foresight to protect myself from paying for it." The full weight of the situation landed on Kyle. He was the one who had sent the bill, the one who had promised the property manager that payment was imminent, and the one who had assured the rest of the family that Aunt Liz was the easy solution. Now he faced the immediate reality of having to find $12,580.42 from the family's already strained finances. "So, what now, Liz?" David asked, defeated, running a hand through his hair. "Now," I stated, retrieving my document and neatly placing it back in the briefcase, "you inform Caldwell Property Management that the wrong party was billed. You provide them with a copy of this addendum, proving that the ownership, which is you, Kyle, and Carol, is financially responsible for 100% of the capital improvement costs. You will also apologize for the unfounded demand for payment and the implied harassment. And I expect written confirmation from the property manager that my name has been removed from all future liability documents concerning this property." It was a complete and total reversal of power. They had come prepared to dictate my financial fate, and I was leaving after issuing them a set of non-negotiable legal and personal demands. As I stood to leave, I zipped my briefcase shut, the sound a final, satisfying punctuation mark on the discussion. I looked directly at Kyle. "Kyle," I said, my voice softening slightly but holding the edge of authority. "Next time you decide someone's hard-earned savings are your personal emergency fund, maybe check the records first. Or better yet, maybe don't mock the person who keeps impeccable records." I walked toward the door, leaving them huddled around the granite island, the $12,580.42 bill suddenly looking like an insurmountable obstacle instead of an easily solved problem. The air was thick with their frustration, but also, I noticed, a grudging, resentful respect. My junk drawer wasn't just old paper. It was leverage, and in that moment, it was worth more than its weight in gold. The aftermath of the family meeting was not immediately pleasant, but it was profoundly satisfying. My relatives, Carol, David, and especially Kyle, were utterly stunned by the twist. They had banked everything on my compliance and their shared history of mocking my habits, and they lost the gamble spectacularly. Kyle predictably made one last attempt to weasel out. A few hours after I left, he texted me, "Aunt Liz, I spoke to the property manager. They are saying the addendum is too old to be enforceable against the current generation of owners. Can we maybe split it 50-50? Just to make this easier." This was the final desperate struggle before the resolution. He was hoping to scare me with the specter of a prolonged legal fight. I simply replied, "The addendum is a notarized amendment to the original ownership agreement and is a covenant that runs with the land. Any competent real estate attorney will confirm its validity. If you or the property management company wish to pursue this, I am happy to refer you to Mr. Henderson, who drafted the document and who retains a copy. I am not splitting anything. This entire expense is legally 100% the owner's responsibility." Then came the true resolution. Less than 24 hours later, I received two important pieces of communication. First, I got a very stiff, formal email from Caldwell Property Management. It stated in corporate speak that after a review of historical property documentation, they had determined that the previous assessment was sent to the incorrect party. My name was formally removed from the account, and they apologized for the inconvenience. That was the professional acknowledgement of defeat. The $12,580.42 was officially off my back. Second, I received a text from Carol. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was the closest I was ever going to get. It simply read, "Fine. Kyle is handling the restructuring of the loan. Your paperwork worked. We won't be joking about your files anymore." That last line was the true victory. The moral of the story wasn't just about saving money. It was about shifting the family dynamic. The laughter, the condescension, the treating me like a relic. It all stopped. My reputation changed from the weird aunt who hoards junk to Aunt Liz, who you do not, under any circumstances, mess with financially. The real twist, the lingering thought, is what happened next to them. The family had to quickly secure an expensive loan to cover the $12,580.42. Kyle and Carol had to take a significant hit to their savings and credit ratings to cover a debt they had tried to casually foist on me. The cost of their sloppiness, combined with their arrogance, ended up being far greater than the $12,000. They incurred interest, fees, and the cost of the property manager's time wasted. A few months later, I saw Kyle at another family gathering. He was subdued. The shine was off his financial manager title. He actually approached me, a feat in itself. "Aunt Liz," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say, that lease agreement, where did you even keep something that old?" "In the vault, Kyle," I replied, smiling gently. "Labeled, indexed, and completely safe. It's not a junk drawer. It's my future-proofing system." He nodded slowly, looking truly impressed, not mocking. "I guess I need one of those. And that's the thought I want to leave you with." My relatives laughed when I said I saved everything. Every receipt, every contract, every guarantee. They called it useless. But when they tried to saddle me with a $12,580.42 repair bill for a property I hadn't lived in for nearly 20 years, that single meticulously preserved piece of paper was my unbreakable shield. It saved me thousands and taught my family a lesson that no amount of money could buy. Respect the records and never, ever underestimate the person who keeps them. So, for all you meticulous people out there, the ones who get teased for your labels, your files, and your organization, keep going. Your due diligence is a superpower. You never know when that one document, that one receipt, or that perfectly filed contract is going to save your entire nest egg. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, justice, and the power of organization, please like this video, subscribe for more tales of poetic justice, and drop a comment below letting me know what record or item you keep that everyone mocks, but you know is going to save you one day.